Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. We are not in the Starcraft video game today, but we do have another Starcraft miniatures game video for you. The miniatures for the game still aren't out yet, so instead we'll be using these lovely little Carbot tokens that I've printed out and cut out. Don't worry about my wrist, it's just a little fracture. I'll be fine. Now, looking at this setup, you might say, hey, these buildings aren't that good, hey, these tokens are the wrong size. It's fine. We are going to just be going over the basics today, and we'll be talking about how to play the Starcraft miniatures game, going through the different phases, how to roll your dice, and how to interact with the cards that we've gone over in the last couple videos. Because in the faction focus videos, we talked about what the units did, but sometimes that's hard to understand until you actually see how they function on the table and how the rules actually work. So today we've got little standees for our different factions. We've got Terran over here, we've got Zerg over here, and we've got Protoss up here. I've got other tokens for the different things that might come down, like pylons and Omega Worms as well, but we're not going to worry about those for just right now. This video is going to go over the core mechanics of the game, which between this and the prior video should give you a pretty strong feeling of how Starcraft will play, at least in these early days of the game. I should note, as many will have seen, that there's already been a beta update since making those faction overview videos, so some of the info in them is out of date. As I said, it might become in the videos themselves. Hopefully that won't be the case for this video, but I won't make any promises. I believe the core rules are pretty hard set at this point, at least how they want them to function. Some minutia might change in specifics of how movement works or how measuring works, but the things we'll go over here should hold true for the future of the game, at least the foreseeable future. So to play a game of Starcraft the miniatures games, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need a board. Now this is a 3x3 mat. This is the size for skirmish games, or the 1,000 point games. The 2,000 point games that are the larger and more standard engagement games will take place on a 3 foot by 4.5 foot board, which is a little bit of a funny size, but they do find mats out there, and I assume Archon will make them themselves. For right now, and probably for a lot of the early videos, we'll be using this 3x3 mat and be focusing on skirmish size, because that is what most people will play as their first style of game, their first intro games, their first demo games. You will also need some terrain. This terrain is a bit short for how Starcraft Miniatures is. You do usually want some terrain that is 4 inches or higher to be high ground with ramps. I've kind of fudged that here with this. This is Alpha Strike terrain from BattleTech. I've got some tall buildings here, and I've got some small buildings acting as a ramp to step up, and then some smaller buildings to kind of be line of sight blockers, and these can act as the grass, which is a mechanic in the game as well. On top of all the stuff for the table, you will also need miniatures, which again are represented here by these tokens. You will need dice. The Starcraft Miniatures game does use D6 or 6-sided dice. I've got a handful of them over here. You'll probably want between 12 and 20 on hand, though you can play the game with less dice. You'll just have to keep count and re-roll them and stuff like that. It's a little easier if you have a larger dice pool. And then you will need a tape measure for measuring. A standard tape measure will be just fine. I also have a little line of sight indicator on here that I sometimes use for other games. It may be useful in games of StarCraft because line of sight is drawn between bases, but you don't need something like that. You can usually eyeball it or consult with your opponent. So once you have everything in order, you need to learn how the game plays, and we're going to talk about the different phases of the game. Every game of StarCraft takes place over a number of turns, each of which is broken down into 4 phases. Each phase is done in alternating activations, giving players chances to react to their opponents. Personally, I've played a lot of tabletop games, and I prefer alternating activations over I go, you go. I feel the way that the core mechanics of StarCraft are set up are very fluid and solid. Having phases split up and then alternating within the phase is reminiscent of things like BattleTech and the older version of Kill Team before the 2021 version. In general, I tend to like games where you do have chances to react to your opponent, and I think StarCraft gives you plenty of options to do that. The phases of the game are divided into movement, assault, combat, and what's called scoring and cleanup, but the 4th phase I'm usually just going to call the end phase for simplicity. As this is an alternating activation game, somebody is going to have to go first, and that is determined by this first player token. Now, the first player token is handed between players during the game based on a certain set of events that we'll talk about later, but for the movement phase in the first round, which is going to be the first phase of the game, players simply roll off, and whoever rolls higher gets to pick who is the first player in the first round. In later rounds, the movement phase, it is decided by whoever has the least number of victory points, allowing a sort of catch-up mechanic, and if both players are tied on victory points, you once again roll off, and the winner decides who goes first. For subsequent phases, like the assault phase and the combat phase, the player who passes activating their models first gains the first player token, letting them go first in the next phase. This is a fun little mini game in activations. Generally, this means the player with less units on the table goes first each round, but you can always choose to pass instead of activating a model, immediately gaining the first player token if your opponent hasn't passed this turn. You may choose to do this sometimes in order to gain an advantage at the cost of your own activation economy. Now, one thing I forgot to mention you will need when you start to play the game is some double-sided activation tokens. These will come with the Starcraft miniatures game, probably in the box. They might also be available separately, but you can really use any double-sided token you want. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to be using some old school Warhammer Underworlds tokens. These are red on one side, maybe a little hard to see because they're quite small, and white on the other side, so these are easy to track which side which is on. The first phase in each turn is the movement phase. As expected, this is the phase in which you do most of your movement, though not all of it. The actions you can take during this phase are move, disengage, deploy, and hold. We'll go over move first, even though deploy technically is the first thing that you can do in a game, but move is a little bit more generalized, and you'll need to understand how movement works before you understand how everything else works. Moving in StarCraft is actually fairly simple compared to many other games I've played. When you choose a unit to become the active unit and move, you pick a model in the unit to be the leading model. In a single model unit, this is always the one model that's there, obviously. Then you move the model a number of inches up to the unit's move characteristic, plus any modifiers it may have. For example, this unit of 3 roaches, and 3 is the standard unit size, can move 4 inches. I will choose this model to be the leading model and move it forward 4 inches. Remember that a model can't move any further, so there is no like rotating shenanigans to get extra distance. That might have to be clarified with oval-shaped bases, but for round bases, just move forward the inches that are available to you. Then, after the leading model has moved, simply place the rest of the squad within coherency of the leading model. Coherency, if you haven't played many tabletop games before, is the distance together models have to stay to remain a legal unit, since you don't track models individually. Coherency is generally a 3-inch radius from one another, but certain units have a 4-inch coherency and have it stated on their card. So this roach unit has a 3-inch coherency. This has been the leading model, so that's where it is. I simply have to place the other 2 roaches within 3 inches of that model, which means you do get a little bit of extra movement by placing this roach 3 inches in front, and this roach 3 inches in front of that. This unit is in coherency and has moved. Once you've completed its move, or whatever other action you're going to take in the phase, you're going to give it an activation marker for that phase. I'll be using red for movement activation markers, so now this unit has moved and has been marked as done so. If you have active abilities, you can do them before or after the action you take in the phase. So if I wanted to use the burrow ability of these roaches, I could have done it before they moved. Granted, if they have tunneling claws, they could still move when burrowed, or I could move them up and then burrow them immediately afterwards. Either way, that's where they end up. Movement is the most common action you'll take in this phase. Movement is measured around terrain and buildings and cannot end within engagement range of enemies, which we'll talk about shortly. Models cannot move up or down terrain unless the terrain has a ramp or an access point like a ladder. For instance, on this building, which we have said is a piece of terrain, roaches could not climb up the side of the building, but if they wanted to move up the ramp and come up here and then kind of move around the back, they could absolutely do so. Terrain with no access points, like these shorter buildings, cannot be climbed on top of or set up on top of unless both players agree it has the high ground keyword. We might talk about terrain more in depth in the future videos, but this early in the beta the rules are still being sharpened a bit, so I plan to wait a few more patches before getting too heavy on that level of minutia. There are already some questions about how high ground works, so we will hopefully see that answered in future patches. There are also specific flying units we may see in the future, or we know we will see in the future, but we won't go into how that works now because flying interacts with ground units in various different ways. And since we don't have any flying units, I don't think it's worth going into how flying works just at this time. Now for a single model unit like this queen, you simply measure the distance and move it. There is no leapfrogging allowed, so this queen simply moves 4 inches forward and is done with her action. The next type of action you can take is the disengage action. Starcraft, like many tabletop games, has a concept of an engagement range. Every unit has a 1-inch radius around itself that you cannot enter normally by moving or running, but you can by taking the specific charge action in a later phase. If you are in engagement range in later turns after being charged, you have to take a disengage action instead of a normal move action to leave the combat. To make a disengage action, the active unit has to be engaged with an enemy unit. This Stalker, for instance, is not engaged with the Zerglings and can't make a disengage action, but these Adepts definitely can, as they are currently engaged with the Zerglings. A unit can make a disengage action by making a standard move action with the following exceptions. You have to be engaged with an enemy at a time, you cannot become engaged with an enemy after moving, and any models that cannot be outside of engagement range after the disengage action is finished are destroyed. So a standard disengage action might look something like this. I wish to disengage with these Adepts. I'm going to choose this model as my leading model, move it backwards 5 inches because that's how far Adepts move, and then I will simply place the rest of these Adepts within the 3-inch coherency bubble and fall them back from the fight. They're no longer in the fight with the Zerglings, so they are free from the melee attacks for now, and they gain an activated token. The main downside of a disengage action is that any unit that disengages cannot shoot or charge unless they had more supply than the unit they disengaged from. In this instance, the Adepts are 1 supply, and this unit of Zerglings is 1 supply, since both units are at their full strength. So this unit of Adepts in the subsequent assault phase cannot shoot or charge. However, here's a different scenario. Zealots, at least at time of recording, are 2 supply to the Zerglings 1, which means this unit of Zealots can take the disengage action, moving away 4 inches with the leading unit and then setting up the other units within coherency. And they did not end within 1 inch of this queen, so they are not engaged with the queen, but they can charge the queen in the subsequent assault phase because they are more supply than the unit that they disengaged from, the Zerglings. This allows things like Zealots to leave combat and then charge, or heroes such as Artanis or Kerrigan count as 2 supply for purposes of this as well, so it's very hard to lock down powerful melee units. This is also true for strong shooting units that are 2 supply or more. A unit of, for instance, 4 Marauders is 2 supply to the Zerglings 1, so if the Zerglings have locked in the Marauders can fall back and shoot in the subsequent assault phase. The next action we're going to talk about is the deploy action, which is not necessarily an action you take, it is a move you take, but it is a move that can only be taken by units that are not currently on the board. Now, when the game starts, no models will be on the board. You do not deploy models on the board as you do in certain other miniatures games. Instead, you have your list and all of your units begin in reserves, and then they arrive on the table. As the game goes on, you can bring more models onto the board from reserves, increasing the unit count and possibly replacing wounded and destroyed models. How many units are allowed on the table is dictated by supply. Each mission will tell you how many points of supply you can begin with on the board and how many units of supply are added each turn. In skirmish mode, you will start with either 3 or 4 supply on the board, or can have 3 or 4 supply on the board by the end of round 1. And in standard engagement, it will be doubled to 6 or 8. While the most supply you can have on the board at any time is 14 in standard engagements and 7 in skirmish mode, rather that is the amount of supply you can have in the final turn of each of those game modes, you will lose models over the course of the game, so your list will likely include more supply maximum than that. To deploy a unit, it must be in reserves, somewhat obviously. The normal way to bring models into reserve is to walk them onto the board from your board edge. This is done exactly like making a move action, except you start measuring from the edge of the board rather than from where the models are. In this scenario, the Terran player has this edge of the board as their player edge, and they want to bring their unit of Marauders onto the board. So I'm going to measure 4 inches from the board edge, place the first Marauder within 4 inches, and then place the second Marauder within 3 inches of that, which is coherency range, and then mark them with an activated token. Then it would be the Zerg's chance to bring a model on the board, and they would do so the same way. However, some abilities or units may allow you to deploy your units in other ways, like proxy racks, pylons, or overlords. These abilities will tell you how to deploy when you use them. Deploying units is a core component to the game from a design and a tactica perspective. The final action a unit may take is to hold. In this instance, the unit simply gains the activation token and you let your opponent go next. As an example, this Goliath is within 12 inches of the roaches, which is within its range of its weapons, but it knows that the roaches' range is only 8 inches, so it doesn't want to get any closer. Right now it can shoot the roaches and not shoot back, so it will simply take the hold action, gain a token, and pass to the opponent. Now remember how I said you can always pass your activation? Hold is different from pass, as hold only skips the current model's activation, but allows you to later activate a different model, for instance, bringing more reserves onto the board, while pass skips all future activations as well. When you choose to pass, for instance, if the Zerg did not want to bring any further reserves on from the board, you say pass, and if you are the first player to pass in the phase, you gain the first player token, and you become the first player for the next phase. Editor Zach here. I should note that once you pass in a phase, you may not activate any further units in that phase. So this is really an action you take when you don't want to do anything else and you simply want the benefit in the subsequent phase. So make sure that when you pass, you don't want to do anything else because your opponent can keep activating their models and knows that you are done with yours. After the movement phase is complete, players will move on to the assault phase, which is where most of the action takes place. The player with the first player token goes first, and units can take the following actions: ranged attack, run, charge, or hold. Ranged attack allows a unit to, perhaps predictably, make a ranged attack with a weapon they have. To make an attack, choose a target and measure to see which models in your attacking unit are in range of that target using the range on the provided weapon. Units that are not within engagement range of enemy models cannot shoot enemy units that are within engagement range of other friendly models without a special rule, aka if there's a combat going on, you cannot shoot into it. Units that are within engagement range of enemy models when they are selected to do a range attack may shoot any unit they are engaged with some downsides. That is to say, if you are currently in a fight, if enemies have currently charged you, you can shoot them, but you can't shoot other units that you aren't currently charged with. If you have multiple weapons, you will measure and roll those weapons separately in separate pools, so be aware with units like Marines who can have up to 3 different weapon types. In this example, the first player to go in the assault phase is the Zerg player, and they choose these 3 roaches to make a ranged attack. The ranged attack, the acid spit for the roaches, is an 8-inch range. As we saw before in the last phase, none of them are within range of the Goliath, but they are within range of this unit of Marines that have come before them before the end of the move phase finished. So all 3 roaches will be able to attack the Marines. Once you determine the models in range, multiply the number of models by the rate of attack of the weapon and get that many dice. Also determine your surge dice. In this example, we have 3 roaches and their rate of attack is 3. So we will get 3 dice per roach for 9 dice in the attack. These roaches have also taken the Hydriatic Bile upgrade, which gives them Surge Light, and Marines are a light type unit, so they will get to surge against this unit. Technically, I believe you are supposed to roll your surge dice even if you do not surge against the target unit for perhaps future rules, but for right now, this is a valid surge target. Hydriatic Bile gives them D3+1 surge against light targets. Now, you can use any D6 for a D3 and simply have the number that you roll. For instance, if you roll a 4, that counts as a 2 because a D3 can only be 1, 2, or 3. And of course you round down. So 1 or 2 is 1, 3 and 4 is 2, and 5 and 6 is a 3. However, I have these kind of fancy D3 dice, which have 2 3s, 2 2s, and 2 1s, and no 4 5s or 6s, so I will usually use that for my D3 surge dice. Once you've gotten your dice together, you roll the dice, looking for results that match the hit characteristic for the weapon. If you are unfamiliar with tabletop games, you are looking for results that equal or exceed the characteristic. The surge dice is also rolled at the same time, and it's used in the next step. So in this instance, we take our 9d6 and our d3, and we're going to roll them. Any numbers that meet or exceed your target number, in this case, the roach's target number is a 3, are successes, and we set them to one side, and any numbers that are lower than the target number, so in this case a 1 or 2, are discarded. They are failed results. So this unit of roaches rolled slightly below average by getting 5 hits on 9 dice, but that is very reasonable still. If the unit you are targeting has the keyword for your target's surge type, as we determined in this example they do, you set aside a number of dice equal to the surge dice. These are skipped in the next step. So I rolled 5 successes, and this is a valid surge target, and I rolled 2 on my surge dice, but remember Hydriatic Bile is D3 plus 1, so this 2 is really a 3. I take 3 of my successes and put them to the side. These are skipped during the defensive step. Get rid of your surge dice, you don't need it anymore. Next, the defending player rolls a number of dice equal to the number of hit successes minus the amount that were surged. While you can take and roll your opponent's dice, please always ask before touching your opponent's dice and bring your own dice to be polite. In my examples, I will just be using the same dice pool because it's my dice and I am here by myself in my basement. In this instance, these Marines will be rolling the 2 remaining successes that were not surged. These rolls are looking for the defending unit's defense score or higher in the same manner. Remove any dice that succeed the roll, keeping the dice that fail. So in this case, the Marines have a 5-up defense save. So they're going to take these 2 dice, getting a 4 and a 5. Now they were looking for a 5+, so this 5 is successfully saved and removed from the pool, while the 4 goes to add to this surged pool. In certain circumstances, you will also get to roll evade dice as an extra defensive roll. This is done in the exact same process as the defense roll, except using the evade stat instead of the armor stat. This just further lets you whittle down your opponent's successes. Generally, you will not get an evade roll, but it is rolled when the target unit is in combat, so if these units were engaged with one another, the Marines would get to roll their evade roll with this final dice, but as they are outside of range and they don't have any special rule allowing them to roll an evade dice, this gets added to the final pool. The final step is to multiply the amount of dice in the damage pool by the weapon's damage profile. Now, most weapons in the game are 1 damage, though we have seen in the faction preview videos that we did that certain weapons have 2 or even 3 damage. Now, the Roach's Acid Saliva is only 1 damage, so these 4 dice in the damage pool become 4 damage. Damage is added to the target's damage pool, which you can track with a dice. After damage has been added, if it exceeds the target's HP stat, the defender removes the enemy model and reduces the damage pool by that HP stat, and then repeats until either the damage pool is empty or it no longer exceeds the target's HP stat. Now, it may help you to have different colored dice to track damage pools so you don't get them mixed up with dice. I'll be using some old Warcry dice that are red and larger so I don't get them mixed up with my regular white D6s. To start, units have a damage pool of 0, and these Marines didn't stimp, so they don't have anything like that on them. So I add 4 to their damage pool, as that's how much damage was added from the attack. Now, the Marines' HP is 2, so 4, we will reduce that down to 2 and remove 1 Marine. And then 2 is still equal to or greater than the stat, so we'll remove the last 2 points and remove 1 more Marine. The controlling player of the unit that has the damage pool gets to decide which models are removed, so you may either remove models that are further away or closer depending on what you were trying to do with the unit in question. Now, in this instance, there was no leftover damage in the damage pool after removing models, but if, for instance, the Roaches did 5 damage to these Marines, I would leave 1 damage floating on the unit, and so the next time the unit took 1 more damage, a Marine would die. However, as it stands, they need 2 more damage added to the unit to take out another Marine. Now, you'll repeat this process if there are any other weapons in the group for those weapons, measuring from the specific models that have the separate guns, and then the activation ends. So for instance, if these Marines were shooting, they can have up to 3 different guns. You'd have to measure from each specific Marine model to see if that specific weapon is in range for the AG-12 or the rocket launcher. Now that these Roaches have finished their shooting attack, you flip their activation token over to the other side. So they will have now the white token to indicate that they have moved in the movement phase and done something in the assault phase. After that, you pass the activation over to the next player, and now the Terran will get to do something in the assault phase. Units that get activated in this phase but don't have guns or would rather move further may choose to run instead. To run, simply move as in the movement phase, following all the same restrictions. That's it. For instance, Kerrigan here is a little too far away from Jim to use her gun and doesn't necessarily want to charge him this turn, so she's just going to move her 7 inches this way ending up over by this ramp, and then she will mark herself as completed for the phase. Alternatively, a unit focused on melee likely would prefer to charge. Charging is much like moving or running with a few changes. First, you must declare a charging target. For instance, this unit of Zerglings is going to charge Jim Raynor here. You may declare multiple targets, but the first model moved in the charge has to reach all target units, so it's often difficult and it's generally better to only select one unit, but there may be instances where you attempt to quote-unquote multi-charge. It's often good to determine the distance between the target and the closest model in the charging unit at this time. For instance, these models are about 6.5 inches away from Jim, some of them 7 or more, 6.5 inches with this closest Zergling. Now you'll roll a d6 and add it to the unit's movement, and as with moving, choose a leading model and move them up to that distance up to the target unit. This move must end within engagement range, aka 1 inch, of the target, which is why it's usually good to note that distance before moving minis. If this distance is not long enough to make it into combat, the charge fails and the unit does not move at all. So let's do 2 examples with this Zergling unit. So we've already determined that the Zergling unit is 6.5 inches away, so if they move 6 inches, they will be within 1 inch of Jim Raynor. Now, the Zerglings move 4 inches, so they only need to roll a 2+ on the dice in order to make it into combat. And in this instance, they've gone and rolled a 1. So the Zergling unit does not move, stays exactly where it is, and their activation would end. However, rolling a 2 or higher on a d6 is usually pretty easy, so let's give that another go for an example. In this instance, they rolled a 6, which they add to their 4 inches of movement, giving them 10 inches of movement to charge. If the charge succeeds in this instance, finish moving the leading model as described above, then pick up and move all other models similarly to movement again. So because this leading Zergling can move 10 inches, it can move basically anywhere as long as it ends as close to Jim Raynor as possible within engagement range. So I'm going to move this leading Zergling right here. Now you have to pick up and place the models as you do in the movement phase with the following priority. If you can place them in base-to-base combat with the enemy model that they're charging, you have to do that. If you can't place them in base-to-base contact with the enemy model, you have to place them within engagement range of the enemy model, aka within 1 inch. If you can't do either of those things, you must place them in coherency as close as possible to the leading model. So I'm going to move this activation marker and this dice, and we'll show you how that goes. So first we're going to place as many as possible in base-to-base contact with Jim Raynor. Poor Jim is about to get surrounded by Zerglings. Now there are still 2 Zerglings to move, but they cannot be placed within base-to-base combat with Raynor. They must be placed within 1 inch, and if that's not possible due to base sizes or anything like that, you simply place them in coherency as close as possible to the leading model that did the first movement. And after this, the Zerglings have activated, but Jim has not yet. Now that Jim is in combat with these models, in his activation he can choose to shoot the Zerglings, but he can no longer shoot Kerrigan as the Zerglings are engaged with him, and he is not engaged with Kerrigan, probably much to his chagrin. Once in engagement range, units are eligible to fight in the subsequent combat phase, which we'll cover shortly. The final thing a unit can do in the assault phase is hold, which is the same as it was in the movement phase. Once both players finish and/or pass, the game moves into the combat phase. So for instance, this unit of medics, they don't want to charge in because they're not really good at that, and they don't have anything to shoot, especially as they don't have guns. They're a little bit in a bad spot, so they're just going to choose to hold. Now if I choose to pass instead of holding, all models flip their activation tokens, and then I cannot further activate any models. Usually you will not be passing in the assault phase unless you really want that first player token for the combat phase. The combat phase is much more straightforward, and the only things units can do in this phase is fight, if they are within engagement range, alternating starting with the player with the first player token. Combat is executed basically the same as range combat with a few small exceptions. Before attacking, the attacking unit closes ranks, which allows it to perform a 3-inch move, again choosing a leading model and picking up and moving other models afterwards, as long as the leading model can end closer to the enemy unit when the move is complete, and doesn't bring the unit into engagement range of anything it's not currently engaged with. Models currently in base-to-base combat are not moved. In the example we have here with the Zerglings, no close rank can be made because these Zerglings are already in base-to-base combat and these Zerglings can't get any closer, and they can't move into range of these medics to bring them into combat. Let's look at a different example. Over here, this Zerg Queen charged this Goliath in order to get a little bit of punching damage in and hold it in place. Because they are not within base-to-base combat, this Zerg Queen can close ranks, as odd as it is with only one model, and move up to 3 inches as long as it ends base to base with the Goliath before making its attacks. This way you can get a little bit of extra movement and sometimes reposition to get better strikes on your opponent, especially with larger model units depending on the situation you're charging into. After you've done any close ranks, you make the attack as usual, with the eligible attackers being models within engagement range of enemy models, or models that are within base-to-base contact of a friendly model that is also within engagement range. So to give another example, this roach is within base-to-base contact with the Goliath, this roach is within 1 inch, so engage with the Goliath, even if it's not within base contact, and this roach is not within engagement range, but is in base-to-base contact with a model that is, so all 3 roaches could fight the Goliath in this instance. After you've determined the number of models in the unit that can attack, you follow all the same steps that we went through in the shooting phase. You multiply attacking models by your rate of attack, you roll to hit, you surge, you roll to defend, and if eligible, roll to evade. Generally, models are not eligible to evade against melee attacks, but certain abilities will allow it. Models are removed the same as before. The final phase after combat is the scoring and cleanup phase, where you generally decide how many victory points each player gets depending on the mission, and when various effects stop happening. These are varied and complicated, but the main thing to note is that all tokens are removed and buffs expire in this phase unless otherwise specified, or they are ongoing status effects, which will be stated on the ability itself. Scoring will be talked more about if we ever get around to doing mission cards, but again, this early in the beta, those missions are a little bit in flux, so we'll probably hold off a little bit before talking about them. But with this, you know how to play Starcraft the Miniatures game. The mechanics of the game will feel familiar, but still unique to people who have played other minis games before, and they're relatively easy to pick up if you're a fan of the video game and are looking to play the game as your first miniature game. I hope you enjoyed this quick and dirty walkthrough. Please let me know your thoughts on the system or anything about the upcoming Starcraft game, and we hope to see you in the next video. And as always, stay cozy.